I would like to start this presentation with a very brief show of hands. Who of you guys thinks that the burger on the left is the real one? Please raise your hand. Wonderful. Who of you guys thinks that the burger on the right is the real one? Okay, much less people as it seems. So everyone who raised their hands for this one here, for the previous one, really has appetite for a bunch of pixels. Now, my name is Walter Pasquarelli. I used to work until a month ago at The Economist, where I used to cover AI and data policy. I'm now advising full-time organizations from governments and businesses on their AI strategy. The purpose of this presentation here is really to get us thinking about how we can bring generative AI into our organization. It starts with understanding what is it that we're actually talking about? How is this technology different from any other technologies? And what are sort of some of the pitfalls that we need to watch out for when we think about how we can start using it? And typically, when I speak to different executives or government officials, there's a lot of hype around this conversation. There is a lot of sort of AI solutionism, as they call it, thinking really about, oh, generative AI can do everything. So my task for the next 35 minutes or so is to help us shift from confusion to disappointment. Right, this is me. I feel really awkward seeing this every time, but feel free to connect. This is what I do, and I'll just shift this in a moment. Right, the way we're going to approach this, I would first of all like to understanding generative AI. Now, generative AI is obviously part of the family of artificial intelligence. And artificial intelligence, even though we're now part of the summit, even though this is sort of the shiny new topic that we're looking at, is actually nothing new. Artificial intelligence, the birth of it started in the 1950s when Alan Turing famously asked the question, can machines think? And artificial intelligence, for the purpose of this presentation, shall be defined as artificial, being basically non-human, and intelligence, and I know everyone will have an issue with this definition, is the ability to accomplish tasks and solve problems. So artificial intelligence shall be defined as a non-human ability to solve tasks and accomplish problems. And when we look at AI, it's kind of been a bit of a weird ride in the past century or so, in the sense that the industry has been going through AI hypes where a new scientific breakthrough was achieved and everyone was like, oh, wow, we're there at AGI. And then all of a sudden it followed by so-called AI winters, where we were much slower in the discoveries. But to give you a few examples, 1997, IBM's Deep Blue defeated Kasparov in his own game in chess. And again, in 2011, IBM Watson won Jeopardy. And so we've seen always these sort of fluctuations, but I would say really since 2015, when DeepMind's AlphaGo defeated the champion Lee Sedol in the game Go, which was a game that relied much less on sort of just like calculations, but more on things like strategy and intuition, and things that felt somewhat human. And since then, these fluctuations have become less and less frequent, and we're now really looking at a development of this technology that has shifted from incremental to exponential. And businesses loved it, in particular the marketing departments, and they started spreading AI everywhere. This is my favorite example. I hope there's no one from Oral-B here, by the way. But where Oral-B developed this toothbrush that was described as nothing less but genius. All right, I'll just shift it anyway. So let's map generative AI. Let's put it in context with artificial intelligence as a whole. So artificial intelligence, think of it as basically the umbrella term. AI. Different kinds of techniques, different kinds of technological branches that it has. Then there's machine learning, which is basically the ability of machines to learn based on experience. And then there's generative AI, which is AI systems that are not only able to learn, but to generate synthetic content, generate things from scratch, generate things that did not exist before. And within that, there are so-called foundation models, which are basically the backbone of generative AI. We're going to look at them in a moment. Right. Now, I'll provide you with a very quick technical overview. It's not going to be too complex, I promise you. Typically, when we were looking at artificial intelligence is based on data, okay? Numerical representations of the world, if we want. That can be about how many bottles of Pepsi did we sell last year? At what point did we sell them? Who bought them? And usually, we would have basically AI systems that would have a narrow application. So think of it as one system to solve one particular task. One system that would help us segment our customers, and another system that would help us predict sales. But something that has, oh, this is the wrong one, sorry. But something that happened in, I would say, the past 8 years or so, is that some research organizations, particularly on the west coast of the US, started asking themselves, what would happen if instead of these narrow data sets, we now start using massive amounts of data, maybe all the data that we can find in the web, the publicly available one at least. What would happen if we develop much larger models and we pass them through so much computing power that maybe a nation is not even able to accomplish that? And what we landed with is with foundation models. And these foundation models, think of it as they almost twist the concept around. So rather than looking at basically a narrow application of AI, we're looking now at a system that can accomplish multiple tasks. Multiple tasks such as writing marketing copy, and the same system can help us develop a script, or the same system can help us create questions for moderators, or maybe writing a new rap song. One to rule them all, so to speak. Does anyone recognize this? Yeah. Oh yeah, good. Does anyone recognize it now? Right. Generative pre-trained transformer. That's basically an example of a large language model. And that's the same one that has basically been the backbone of ChatGPT, which is the tool that I presume everyone has been trying out. Who of you has used ChatGPT already? Okay, this looks like pretty much everyone, but not everyone. Okay. And there's various applications when we actually look at these kinds of generative AI tools, to the extent that there's now all these tools that are popping up. One that is for specialized in writing marketing copy, another one that might be specialized in generating images, to the extent that analysts are foreseeing the emergence of a so-called foundation model economy. A bit like the digital platforms economy. Do you remember like 10 years ago when Facebook came out? Or when Amazon came out? So a platform that can host different kinds of creators and businesses. And that's why, in my view at least, the investments into these foundation model companies have been so large. So if we look at Mistral, which is a French one, I think, secured over 100 million in its seed phase. Typically, startup at that stage secure 3 to 5, maybe 10 millions, but not more than that. And generative AI has now gone mainstream. ChatGPT became the fastest growing app of all time until Threads, the app from Meta that sort of tried to compete with Twitter and now crashed again, superseded it. But I think, to me, one of the reasons why, and this is sort of the key point to understand, is that different from sort of AI applications where I'm like, okay, I'm just an innovator, I'm gonna make this app and I'm gonna throw AI at all of our business. The use came from users, and people used it because they thought it was generally useful. And I think that's amazing. Right, so let's look at a few branches of AI tools. There are some that are, for example, text to text. And text means I'm giving it an instruction by text, and it's going to produce an output via text. But it can also be I'm going to give it an instruction via text, and it then produces another kinds of output. So this one here, beyond ChatGPT, okay, it's not only about ChatGPT, that's my personal mission to show you there's more out there. There's, for example, tools from that can help you in Excel for data analysis here. So this one here is a pretty cool one. You might have an Excel sheet, and you want to ask it, what does it tell us about how many units we sold last year? And it basically can generate a line chart based on the input that you have. So you don't need to be, it kind of democratizes expertise on some level. So it makes it easier for many other people to basically understand how the technology works. Another one is, text to image. So basically, you type in a prompt and you ask it to generate an image that didn't exist before. These are not real images, these are real people, but I hope you know them. But these are not images that were found on Google, okay? These were just like images where the prompt was, show celebrities such as Will Smith or Emma Watson doing ordinary jobs, right? The image on the right, which is the Pope wearing a Balenciaga jacket, which I think looks pretty fire, is one of the first examples of an image gone viral and people thinking it's real. And I know that right now there's sort of a small elephant in the room walking around here, and that brings up the question around like disinformation, of course, right? We're going to look at it shortly after. There's text to speech or text to music, and this is basically, this one here is a company called Synthesia, which is pretty cool. So basically they have an avatar. This is again an avatar of a person that was kind of like filmed, and they then through basically the same technology as deepfakes are allowing it to sort of move the mouth and make it say anything that you want them to. But this is sort of, to bring it from a business perspective, this is a tool that can basically be used in customer service. If you think about chatbots where you are on the phone and it's very clumsy and very annoying, you can use these kinds of tools to basically make it a little bit more animated. One use case that I think is quite interesting is that people are using them as a substitute for voice notes. So instead of just sending voice notes, they send emails or WhatsApp messages where they basically have their own avatar just speaking. So if you don't enjoy voice notes, I know people are usually quite split on that. Lots of success with that. Right, and the technology basically works that people input a prompt via text. So say this thing here, say this other thing here, and it generates it and the avatar speaks it out. This here is my favorite, no, not again, thank you. This here is my favorite example. It's an AI-generated video, and I think it's crazy, and I want to show it to you. It's a shame that the sound isn't working, I think, but let's put it on full screen. The sound makes it even a little bit more immersive, but have a look at this. Can we turn the lights down a little bit? Is it possible? Wait, great. So this is a video of basically Finland in the future, showing robots, humans having to struggle with like these kinds of new emerging systems. I'm quite concerned the first movie made by AI is about us killing us, but anyway. And what I think is quite interesting about this one is, who of you guys recognizes the actors? Okay, that's the answer I was hoping for. Nobody, because they don't exist. So they were made from scratch, and the sound isn't working, but even the music, even the voice of the narrator, who is sort of like one of the 90s narrators in a world that does typical sound, entirely generated by AI. And people are starting to feel the burn now, as they say. So you see Hollywood going on strike, protesting these developments because extras fear their jobs. In my opinion, rightly so. But I guarantee you, give it 2 to 3, maximum 5 years' time, and there will be the first Hollywood blockbuster generated maybe by some kid in a garage through a laptop just like the one that I have right there. On some level, if you think about it, that the production costs for this movie here were 0. The images were first generated through Midjourney. They were then passed through a tool called Runway. And it democratizes access to these technologies, right? Because rather than sort of operating through an industry that has very high levels of barrier, possibly nepotism as well, as it's sort of known in Hollywood, it basically creates the capabilities for everyone to do that. But there are, of course, inevitable questions about how they could be used and what happens, of course, to the people who may be displaced. It will also generate a lot of jobs. So just to be clear on that, the studies on automation that predict so and so many jobs will be gone are usually very imprecise. So we can expect a lot of new jobs for this to be created. Right, so not again. This one here is just a stat about the amount of investment reports that have been generated about AI within a quarter. So I think within Q4 of 2022 and Q1 of 2023, it's an increase of 2,040%. There's probably going to be a bubble that is emerging, and it will burst, but it doesn't change the fact, as we say where I'm from, the cat is out of the sack, which basically means the innovation has already been produced, and people will be using them. It just means, similar as we saw in previous sort of industrial revolutions, that there's going to be a few players that will cement their dominance in the field, like in the same case with social media. Right. This session here is now on the art of the possible. And essentially, when we think about generative AI readiness, we are basically looking at a number of different building blocks. And the first one is the alignment with the business strategy. Okay? So throwing a neural network at your organization is not going to increase revenue automatically, just for the avoidance of doubt. But it's about identifying the use cases. We then look at sort of what are the building blocks of AI, and the clear building blocks are, first of all, data. Without data, you don't have AI. AI consists of data. And of course, the skills and talent that produce it. Skills and talent are probably the scarcest resource out there. I was looking up for sort of an article that would sum it up and sort of like that would say, oh, this is a nice headline. And I found one from The Guardian that says, skills and talent rare in AI development. And I look at the date, it was 1997. And they keep just popping up more and more, just because that's just a skill that everyone that everyone is competing for. These are probably some 5 success factors or 5 steps that I see some of the real Gen AI pioneers following when it comes to bringing the technology into their business. The first thing is really demystify the technology. So it's not about the Terminator. It's not about sci-fi, for better or for worse. The second thing is, again, identify use cases for your business. So think about really where can it help us? What problems can it solve? What are our pain points? What are some tasks that maybe we don't enjoy doing? What can we automate? Number 3, once you have thought about the counterfactuals and we've gone into dreamland, we then need to apply the constraints. So their ideas are realistic. And then we look at the capabilities and the constraints that we need in order to develop these systems. And think again, data, talent and skills, and usually infrastructure. Step number 4 is start small, but start. So create maybe a pilot, create an MVP, something where if things go wrong, it's not a total disaster. Something that basically we can trial it out, we can build a success story, build momentum, particularly with your executives in your organization, then scale it once we have seen that, okay, this is a tool that is actually really quite building. And finally, weave in sort of the topic and ethics and trust. It was meant to say from the start, not from the trust, apologies for that. Really from the start. Because there's one argument for that, and research shows very clearly that responsible AI use is generally seen as a competitive advantage. I would rather use a tool where I can trust the outcome rather than one which is cheaper but might produce things that are crazy. So that's really a key competitive advantage that people, I think, really need to be aware of. This here is one of my favorite studies, actually. So it was produced by the MIT, by the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and it's sort of one of the first studies that emerged on productivity. So how much can it actually help us become better? And here we see that the evidence is very clear, that first of all, it did improve productivity. It makes people more efficient. The outcome become of better quality. But crucially, it makes people happier. So it increases job satisfaction. Because I don't have to do the same repetitive tasks that I do every day, but I can just give it to one of these tools that are out there, and it might not be perfect. Okay, the outputs that we get are not perfect, but they are a first start, And as someone like myself who is a lot in writing, it helps me get past the blank page. And in the end, the output looks nothing like ChatGPT produces it, but at least it's something that I can work with. Right, okay. So here's the elephant in the room, trust. Don't put confidential client information in ChatGPT, okay? I just want to say it clearly, don't do it. But if you really need to use these tools, there is a small functionality when you go into settings, which is chat history and training, which you have to turn on. So that means that the data you put in is not going to be used for the training of the models. The risk otherwise is that next time that the foundation model, GPT, that we discussed earlier, is going to create an output, it might just spit it out, everything that you said it to someone else, and we obviously want to avoid that, okay? The other issue is, and that's sort of a principle that I use myself, is at this stage of the technological development, only ask it questions to which you already know an answer to. So use it for efficiency. Don't use it yet as a search engine. Otherwise, you will suffer the same fate as the case of lawyer GPT, who had to appear in front of a court and unfortunately did his legal research for cases using ChatGPT. ChatGPT just made a bunch of cases up, and in fact, the lawyer had to appear himself in front of court then for fabricating wrong statements. This one here is actually quite an interesting example. Unfortunately, my internet connection isn't great, but this is an example of scam emails and phishing. So remember earlier where we discussed that that you can replicate voices in audio, right? 3 seconds is all it takes to replicate my voice and call someone and say, hey, I'm in danger. Can you transfer £1,000 or €1,000 to this person? And there's already examples of that. So this video here that I'll be happy to share it with you later on shows it's basically a live example of someone within a company calling her colleague and say, hey, transfer me $100. And she actually does that. So it's very real. It's not hypothetical. It's not a theory when we talk about these issues. Okay, so let's look at case studies now. Half a year ago when I started, oh God, this is the water coming up. Half a year ago when I started sort of doing the research specifically for companies that were interested in looking at the case studies, people are like, okay, but can you show us how other people have done it? The field was actually there wasn't that much out there, right? There were just people using tools. But a few things have changed now. So here's, for example, one case study of Twilio, which uses one of these generative AI tools for information management. So think of it, you're an employee in a new organization. We've all been there, okay? The bigger the organization, typically the bigger the chaos. And you might be going on holiday and you want to know, where can I apply for my annual leave? Or maybe, where's this document here? Where can I find that? Or maybe, who's the person that is responsible for doing this? And everyone's like, well, it's this person. It's like you navigate a bureaucracy, basically. And Twilio integrated a tool into Slack that you can basically just ask a question. It's like precisely like, okay, where can I apply for annual leave? And it sends you the link. Where can I do this? And it directs you to the right person. And what's quite interesting is that as the numbers show that it actually achieved a 65% auto-resolution rate. So the necessity to go to a human operator became much less. Here's another one from a company called Kili, that what they did is basically they developed a tool that can better understand products. So if I'm on, I don't think they integrated it in Amazon to the best of my knowledge, but if you have an online shop and you integrate this tool, you can then use it to ask questions about products that might not be on the product specification. So it gives you, basically, it replicates almost like being in a shop, right? Where you can ask more questions instead of needing to call someone and speak to a chatbot or having to send out an email. This one here, I have included it because I think it's an interesting application, but also because I want to give you sort of a grain of salt of warning. Like, with generative AI, it's because the application is real, and I believe in generative AI, but there's also some applications which I think are a little bit sort of like for the headlines. I think this one, I don't want to make false accusations, but I think that this could be one of those. For example, Morgan Stanley used GPT-4 as the language model to get support for its financial advisors. So they can basically ask questions to GPT-4 about maybe some previous investment reports or something else. I do not think, and I do not recommend anyone using ChatGPT for investment advice, but it can help maybe with some, like in the case of Morgan Stanley, they probably use it a bit for, again, information management about past reports. I guarantee you they're not using it for making investment decisions. Like I'm putting my money on this. And then there's another one here. I'm not sure if there's any engineers here, but General Motors and Autodesk that bring basically generative AI into engineering. Think of it like, for example, creating a first design. So a first design that can help us sort of, again, get past the blank page. The first draft is imperfect, but it can speed things up for engineers. This one here is a pretty cool case study, actually, about architects. That can use a tool called makeit.ai to first design a first floor plan. So they might say, okay, I want a house with 3 rooms and 1 bathroom and 1 bedroom and a garden or so. And it generates that floor plan. Again, it's imperfect, but it's a first step to make us quicker. Right, how much time do we have? Okay, so the other thing I wanted to say is generative AI is a journey. So it's not something that you just built in a day. I would say it's good to see it as an endeavor, okay? It's good to see it as a long time process where it's a trial and error where we try out different tools and maybe one is better than the other. The other thing to be aware of as well is that there's a lot of tools out there. Okay, there's so many offerings. So one question that I had from a session from about 2 weeks ago, someone says, well, with so many offerings out there, which one should I choose? And my advice would be actually pick a provider that you think has a future and sort of like is large enough to be able to pivot in different directions as your industry might have different kinds of requirements. Okay, so I have a small issue now because we are a lot of people here, so I don't think we can make the practical exercise. I think there's more people who actually showed up than I initially thought, which is a good thing. But this is how, for example, we could think about prototyping some use cases. We can't do it right now, there's really too many people. But one thing to say is always start with the problem. Always start with the issue. Always start with what you want to solve. Then think about the desired state, and we can think about sort of the short, medium, and long-term implications. Happy for you guys to take a picture and trial it out within your organization. Okay, so this is me again. What I just wanted to say is very happy to stay in touch. This is a QR code to my LinkedIn profile. So you can drop me a message if you have any questions. I'm here to answer them. As I said, I believe in generative AI. I think there's a real positive potential. How we shape it is, of course, the question that is up to us. So thanks for listening. We have 9 minutes for Q&A.
Thank you. Great presentation. I'm going to use my opportunity for 2 questions. First, can you talk about the obvious questions every enterprise would have? Open source versus proprietary models, and the kind of infrastructure to actually, secure the model and the data. So,
yeah.
Your own instance, or actually, how do you handle that?
Yeah.
The second thing is, can you talk about the adoption of generative AI in the company? How do you train people so that the 80% of people that will leave the room without saying whether they like it or whether they are afraid of it actually speak up? Because those are, I think the biggest elephant in the room.
Mm-hmm. All right, proprietary models versus open ones. Open ones are typically, here we go. Open models are typically a little bit bigger. So what their advantage is that they can be helpful for sort of allowing more flexibility. They are bigger, they allow for more flexibility, but they're also less safe. The majority of companies that I've spoken to that are sort of not directly in media production or content production, think enterprises, a health enterprise, an engineering firm, they prefer proprietary models. They're a little bit smaller, but they're safer. And if you're dealing particularly with sensitive data sets, they might be perhaps the better option. When it comes to the second question about the bringing it sort of like training people for that, that's a very important one, simply because most of the research that we have nowadays show that employee acceptance of these tools is the biggest hurdle to tech adoption. So not only for AI, but for tech adoption more broadly. So there's two elements there. The first one, I would say, is really the demystifying of the technology again, so to show that actually we don't need to be scared about it. I've worked with organizations who are unionized, and they are like, we're really worried about this because we don't want people to go on the barricades just because we're trialing out ChatGPT. And so there's that element to teach people about that we don't need to be scared about it. I mean, I remember seeing, there's a headline from the New York Times that was called "The Threat of the Machine Age," which was from 1932, okay? So the fear about automation is as old as time. And I mean, we don't need to be worried. You don't need to be worried about losing your job because of AI, but rather because of someone using AI, right? And so I would say that demystification and sort of explaining to people how the technology works, that's step number one. For training, there's different kinds of approaches there. One are probably, I would say, training programs. They're usually the best ones. So where you split them up by business function. So you have one for sales or for marketing, again, depending on your needs. So it needs to filter down from the AI strategy. And you split them up by function. The other option that I've seen for very large organizations is to work on so-called academies. So where they basically might get people from the outside or from the inside, and they will host regular training sessions across the whole company until everyone gets up to speed with that. But I would say before you make any of these kinds of decisions, and I'm shooting myself in my own foot here because I'm working on that myself, you want to pilot them. So you want to try them out first before you set yourself up for disappointment, where I was like, well, people told me it increases productivity by 50%. Like, it doesn't always do that, right? So you want to pilot them and understand what's good for you, and then you train people. Yeah. Hope this answers your question. Great. Anyone else? 5 more minutes. Yes, you, sir.
Thanks for the presentation, first of all. I see pretty well how to find use cases based on business pain points already identified. I have more difficulties to see how to identify the tasks that you don't like to do, because it's not something we are used to do in the companies. So do you have any advices on how to get that going?
Well, I mean, one way to do that is just like, well, it's probably like an internal research program, I would guess, right? You want to speak to people and you want to have someone external doing that so that people actually tell the truth. That would be my opinion. You could run a survey across, again, business functions, or a big survey with all your, with say 1,000, 2,000 employees, segmented by business function. And there, that gives you some initial data points, but then you want to speak to the people directly. But I think it has to be done externally. I don't see a way in which people will always say exactly what they think about the task that they don't like. Another pretty cool approach that I saw a Danish firm doing is that they ask people to almost keep something like a diary. So they would, for a week, they would basically map everything that they do and say like, I don't like this, I don't like that. And then basically that could help them understand exactly their pain points. Because sometimes people do things that they might not even be aware of, that this is something that they find incredibly draining. Yeah, thank you. Okay, yeah, one more.
First of all, a great presentation. Thank you very much for that. Thank you. And my question is, so you say that align with the business strategies.
Yeah.
And in an organization like ours, you have a regional team, a global team, and then the market where the P&Ls are. So which business strategy would you say that we should align the AI strategy to be? Because, there is a transformation agenda above the market, and then there are market who's supposed to take after the P&L. Yeah. Maybe just suggestions from you. Yeah.
There's an element, of course, on reporting lines there. But I would say that the central business strategy is always the one to go for. So sometimes I speak to like CDOs and they're like, we've now report directly to the CEO. And that sort of allows us to be more central stage and really work directly because of the importance of, say, data governance or AI governance. It's become centralized, but there will probably be that bias within organizations that you work for. That maybe you have a chief AI officer or a CDO who reports to the CFO. So they will probably, because of their own ambitions, align it with the financial strategy of the business. But I would say in an ideal case, you always want to align it with sort of the bigger mission of the company. Okay. Anyone else? We have 2 more minutes. Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much. Stay in touch, really. Reach out. I look forward to answering any further questions. And I wish you lots of fun with the rest of the sessions. Thank you for having me.